Why were they all laughing? Not at a joke, not at something clumsy someone had done, but at her. Staff Sergeant Elena Ramirez kept her hands loose at her sides. Pretending she hadn't heard the murmurs ripple down the firing line, she'd stood. In this kind of heat before Afghanistan, Syria, training ranges that baked men into leather, but never with this many eyes treating her like a misplaced chess piece. The steel plate out there shimmered in the desert sun. At first glance, it looked like a tiny coin caught in a sea of heat waves. But Elena knew better. 3 kilometers. That was the official range reading. Give or take a few yards. It was so far. The human eye couldn't tell if you were staring at a circle of steel or a dust spot on the horizon. "No one's hitting that," muttered Petty Officer Davis, lowering his binoculars with a smirk. "Might as well try throwing a rock at the moon." The other SEALs laughed. The kind of laugh that says this isn't serious, the kind that burns worse than direct insults. Only Kowalski didn't join in. The grizzled Marine sniper instructor just let the sound die on its own before he spoke. "That's no one on this team," he said flatly. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. "Winner gets a weak sleeve, miss, and you're cleaning. Latrines for a month." The laughter faded like a radio losing signal. Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez, the oldest and most decorated marksman in the group, leaned on his rifle and shook his head. "Sir, with respect, that's not marksmanship. That's artillery range." Kowalski's mouth curled into something almost like a smile. "That's what makes it interesting. Chief, any of you can hit 1,000. My grandmother could hit 800 on a good day." He gestured toward the distant speck with a casual wave. "But that little piece of steel out there, that's where boys become legends." The words hung in the air, and although nobody said it, Elena could feel the unspoken. Boys, not her. She hadn't come to prove herself to them. At least, that's what she told herself over and over. But something in her chest tightened, a reflex born from too many moments like this, where her presence was questioned before she even spoke. "What's the rifle?" she asked, heads turned. It wasn't common for her to speak up like that in a room full of SEALs and Marine snipers. Kowalski's eyes flicked toward her, studying her face like he was measuring the weight of the question. "Custom, 50 OBMG. Match-grade barrel, precision-tuned trigger. Optics cost more than your car. Everything you need except the skill to use it." The insult landed like a dry slap, but she didn't flinch. The truth was, she'd already started running the math in her head the moment she saw the target. Most of the team began drifting away, muttering about impossible shots, but Elena stayed where she was, her gaze fixed on the wavering glint in the distance. "You're not thinking about taking it," a voice murmured. Corporal Martinez, her spotter for more than 2 years, stood beside her, a faint trace of sweat cutting a line through the dust on his temple. He was the only one here who'd seen her shoot in combat. "Look at the wind flags," she said quietly. They were scattered across the valley floor in intervals, small strips of fabric snapping or hanging limp depending on where you looked. Each one told a different story. "It's not consistent," Martinez said. "Following her line of sight changes every few hundred yards. You'd have to predict the wind across all 3 kilometers." She nodded once. "And the bullets going to be in the air. 18 seconds, give or take. Plenty of time for the wind to change 3 times. He gave a short laugh with no humor in it. "This isn't a shot. It's a coin toss in a hurricane." But she wasn't hearing him anymore, in her mind. The problem had already started to take shape: variables, corrections, drift, drop. A puzzle that wasn't solved by brute force, but by patience and calculation. The Coriolis effect, spin drift, air density, temperature gradients. She'd been taught to think about them in sniper school, but never in this magnitude, at this distance. Even the rotation of the Earth wasn't a theoretical factor. It was real, measurable, and merciless. Kowalski stepped closer, his shadow cutting a line across her boots. "So, Staff Sergeant," he said, You going to take the shot or just stand there doing math? I'll need time to study the conditions, she said, her voice steady. And I want to see the rifle. His mouth twitched into something that might have been approval. You've got until tomorrow morning. Then we move on. Make the shot. You're the one who did the impossible, miss. His eyes held hers. You're the fool who thought she could. The words didn't sting. They settled in her bones like weight on a scale. That night, while the rest of the team slept, Elena sat cross-legged in the dim light of her quarters. Ballistics charts spread. Across the floor, like pieces of a broken map, Martinez sat nearby, silent for the first hour, then reluctantly leaning in to help. They measured wind speeds at ground level 8 miles per hour at 500 feet. 12, gusting to 18 at 1,000 feet. It was different again. Every 100 yards brought a new set of conditions. Her notes were a tangle of calculations and diagrams. The .50 caliber rifle would have to be aimed 15 feet high and 8 feet left of the plate, just to account for bullet drop and drift. By dawn, her hands were smudged with graphite and coffee stains. Her eyes burned, but her mind was electric. She'd found something in the mess, a thread of possibility so thin it could snap with the smallest misstep. When she finally cradled the rifle in her hands, it was like meeting an old friend, heavy but balanced. The matte black finished drinking. In the morning light, the scope German made, flawless, brought the distant steel into focus with a sharpness that made her breath catch. She could see scratches on the plate, tiny imperfections invisible to the naked eye. Jesus, Martinez whispered, peering through his spotting scope. I can see the bolt holes. She wasn't looking at the plate. She was watching the mirage heat shimmer rising from the desert floor. Bending light, warping reality. It wasn't just distortion. It was data. Where the mirage boiled, the air was moving. Where it wavered gently, it was still. Sector 7. She murmured. Thermal column about 8 seconds into flight. Which means it'll push the round up and right. I need to aim lower and further left than the tables say. Martinez groaned, rubbing his face. You're turning this into witchcraft. No, she said softly. Just math with too many moving parts. By midday, the rifle was cleaned, oiled, and zeroed twice over. Every adjustment was measured in fractions of a minute of angle. When the others saw her on the ridge that evening, some smirked, some shook their heads. Word had spread. There was even a betting pool on how far she'd miss. She ignored them. Through the scope, the world narrowed to crosshairs and shimmering distance. The numbers in her head fell into place like tumblers in a lock. 18 hours of preparation for 18 seconds of flight, and tomorrow she'd find out if it was enough. What made the morning feel different wasn't the heat, it was the silence. Even before the sun cleared the horizon, the air was heavy, expectant, as if the desert itself knew something was about to happen. Elena stood at the ridge, boots planted. In powdery dust, the .50 caliber rifle resting on the bipod like a coiled animal. The crowd had grown overnight. Mechanics, medics, cooks, even a couple of officers in pressed uniforms. They'd all come to watch her succeed or fail or both. Martinez crouched beside her, spotting scope already set up. He gave her a sideways glance. Pressure much? She didn't look away from the valley. It's just me, the rifle, and the shot. He smirked. That's not what they see. She knew what he meant. To them, this was entertainment, a long-shot gamble at the edge of possibility. Something to talk about in the mess hall for weeks. But to her, it wasn't just about hitting steel at impossible range. It was about standing here at all after every doubt, every sidelong glance, every unspoken "you don't belong here." Kowalski stepped forward, boots crunching in the dust. He held her gaze for a moment, unreadable. Target's 3,000 and change. Winds are calm for now. You wait too long, they won't be. She nodded once. Copy. The range safety officer's voice cut through the murmurs. Range to target 2,847 yards. Confirmed. Lane is clear. Shooter, you are cleared to engage when ready. Elena lay prone, fitting the rifle stock into the pocket of her shoulder. She adjusted the scope tiny, deliberate turns until the plate swam into sharp relief, a shimmer of silver through the wavering heat. Martinez's voice was calm, measured. Wind at 500. Calm. 1,000. Left to right. 4 miles per hour. 1,500. Variable 6 to 8. Same direction. She breathed slowly, letting each exhale smooth the movement of the crosshairs. She wasn't aiming at the plate. Not even close. 15 feet above. 8 feet left, the point where physics and faith intersected. Wind at target holding steady left to right 7. Martinez continued. Mirage is consistent. Minimal thermal activity. You've got a good window. She thought about the hours spent over charts. The equations scratched in fading pencil. The endless rechecks. She thought about her father's voice years ago, steadying her small hands on a hunting rifle. Don't fight the shot, Ellie. Let it happen. The crowd behind them fell into a hush. Even the air seemed to pause. Her finger settled into the first stage of the trigger. The steel plate was just a shimmer now, dancing in a heat mirage. But her mind could see the path the bullet would take. Martinez's whisper was almost inaudible. Send it, she added the slightest pressure. The rifle erupted in a thunderclap, recoil punching into her shoulder. Dust and grit kicked up around her as the muzzle blast rolled through the ridge like a shockwave. The bullet screamed out at 2,800 feet per second. Already climbing along the arc she'd calculated. She couldn't see it, no one could, but she knew where it was in space, counting the seconds like heartbeats. 3 seconds passing 500 yards, no wind. 7 seconds over the 1,000-yard marker, crosswind nudging, just as expected. 8 seconds sector 7. The thermal column was weaker than it had been yesterday, but still there. A gentle lift pushing the round high and right, she pictured. The path adjusting in midair, invisible but certain. 15 seconds, the apex. Gravity had it now, pulling it down toward the shimmering speck that had mocked them all morning. Martinez's breath caught. Hold. 18 seconds. Across the valley, the plate exploded. A violent flash of sparks. Fragments spinning into the air. A dust cloud blooming like an afterthought. The sound arrived 3 seconds later. A sharp crack that seemed to ricochet off the mountains. The ridge erupted. Yells, cheers, curses, all at once. Someone started laughing hysterically. Another shouted her name over and over. She didn't move. The rifle was still warm against her cheek, her finger resting on the trigger guard. She kept her eye to the scope until the last shimmer of dust began to settle. Leaving nothing where the plate had been, Martinez tore his gaze from the spotting scope, his grin wild. Dead center, you just vaporized it. Kowalski pushed through the crowd, binoculars still in his hands. His expression had shifted, not disbelief, not pride exactly, but something quieter. Hell of a shot. Staff Sergeant. She finally sat up, rolling her shoulder to ease the recoil ache. The crowd swarmed closer, Rodriguez shaking his head. In disbelief, Davis asking to see her calculations. Others just trying to get close enough to say they'd been there. 20 minutes later, the range crew's radio came through with final confirmation. The plate was gone, fragments scattered. Over 30 feet, the hit had been perfect, almost surgical. Martinez chuckled, shaking his head. You know what this means, right? You're never walking onto a range without someone bringing this up. She smiled faintly, but her eyes were still on the valley. It means the impossible just lost a little of its mystery. Kowalski glanced toward her, the faintest grin tugging at his weathered features. No, it means you just became the sniper everyone else measures themselves against. That follows you for life. The desert wind picked up, tugging at her hair, erasing their footprints on the ridge, but the echo of the shot lingered in her mind. 18 seconds of flight. Years of skill behind it. Somewhere far out there, the last particles of shattered steel were settling into the dust. And with them, every whispered doubt she'd ever carried. How fast could a story move across the world? Faster than a bullet, apparently. By the time Elena had cleaned the rifle and packed her gear, word of the shot had already outrun her. The ridge had been a roar of adrenaline, but the mess hall was something else. Every table was buzzing with versions of what had happened. Some had her hitting the plate blindfolded. Others swore the wind had shifted mid-flight, and she'd corrected for it by instinct alone. None of them had been behind. The trigger, she kept her tray close and her head down, not in shame, but because she knew too well what came after moments like this. The exaggerations, the labels, the weight of living up to something that maybe you could only do once in your life. Martinez slid into the seat across from her, grinning like he'd just won the lottery. You've got 2 phone calls waiting. Some colonel in ballistics research. And get this, a rep from a rifle manufacturer. She pushed a forkful of eggs around her plate. They want to know how it was done. They want you in magazines. On posters. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. They're already calling it the Death Valley shot. Her stomach turned. She thought about all the quiet moments that had led to it. The hours of equations in silence. The patient reading of mirage and wind. The way the valley seemed to hold its breath. Those things didn't fit in headlines. By late afternoon, a public affairs officer tracked her down with a camera crew. They wanted a staged photo of her prone with the rifle, the desert in the background. Just for records, they said. She let them take it, jaw tight. The muzzle pointed safely toward the horizon. That night, she couldn't sleep. Not because of the noise outside, though the off-duty crowd was loud, but because the shot kept playing in her head. Not as a moment of triumph, but as a fragile equation that could have gone wrong at a dozen points. She thought of the wind. Flags. The way Sector 7's thermal column had eased just enough for the bullet to ride over it. If it had been half a degree stronger. Her phone buzzed, unknown number. Against her better judgment, she answered. Staff Sergeant Ramirez? A clipped, older voice. This is Carl Harland, 1st Special Operations Command. I watched your shot today. She said nothing. You've got good instincts, he went on. Not just in pulling the trigger reading the air, adapting in. The moment we need that, I'm not here to recruit you. He added before she could respond. I'm here to tell you that people are watching. They'll expect you to keep doing the impossible. That's a dangerous place to live in. The line clicked dead. She lay in the dark for a long time after that, the colonel's words looping in her head. Dangerous place to live in. The next morning, she walked the range alone. The crew had cleared the wreckage, leaving only a scuffed patch of earth where the plate had stood. She knelt, scooping a handful of the dust, letting it run through her fingers. It felt the same as it had before ordinary. Indifferent to legend, she stayed there until the sun climbed high enough to burn the ground under her palms, then headed back toward the base. The stares followed her, now not the dismissive kind, but a mixture of curiosity and awe, the kind given to someone who'd done something most people couldn't explain. It would have been easier if it had stayed here, inside the wire. But by the 3rd day, her inbox was stacked with interview requests. Civilian shooting magazines, defense contractors, even a science podcast that wanted to talk about long-range ballistics. She ignored them all. Martinez found her in the armory, stripping down a standard-issue M110. You're avoiding it. I'm keeping perspective. He leaned against the bench. That perspective's going to get harder to keep. You've got people calling you a natural-born legend. She gave a short laugh. There's no such thing. It was work, all of it. That's not the story they want to tell. And that was the heart of it. They didn't want the truth how. The shot was the result of years of training, sleepless hours over charts, a willingness to calculate past the point where most would quit. They wanted the myth, The lone sniper with supernatural skill, the instant icon. By the end of the week, Kowalski called her into his office. He didn't sit behind the desk, he stood, leaning against it, arms crossed. "You know I've trained a lot of shooters," he said. "Men who could hit anything inside a mile. A few who could stretch that. But 3 kilometers?" He shook his head. "That's not just pulling a trigger. That's patience. Reading the desert like it's a living thing." She stayed silent. He studied her for a long moment. They're going to keep asking for more. Another impossible shot. Another miracle. You can't give it to them every time. Don't try. I wasn't planning on making a career out of circus tricks." She said quietly, "Good." He pushed off the desk. "Because the day you start shooting for applause, you stop being a sniper." That night, the base was quiet for once. She sat outside her barracks, watching the horizon fade into darkness. The desert wind brushing against her face. The stars came out, sharp and endless. And for the first time since the shot, she felt her shoulders ease. It wasn't pride she felt. Not exactly. More like a strange stillness. As if something she'd been pushing toward for years had finally landed, then slipped away before she could hold it. Somewhere, a generator hummed. Far off, a coyote barked at the moon. She thought about the colonel's warning, Kowalski's words, Martinez's grin when the plate shattered. She thought about all the people who'd remember the shot as something magical. And maybe that was okay. Maybe they needed it to be magic. She knew the truth. It was wind, math, metal, and willpower. And in that exact moment, it had been enough. But she also knew something else. One day, someone would come along and break her record, and she'd be the first to shake their hand. What was worse, missing a shot when no one was watching, or taking it with lives on the line? Elena wasn't sure, but she was about to find out. The call came 2 weeks after the Death Valley shot. She was still shaking sand out of her gear when Kowalski found her on the range, his expression telling her this wasn't about training. "Pack your kit," he said simply. "You're going forward." The operation brief was quick, clinical, and stripped of drama. A joint tasking with a SEAL element in northern Afghanistan. A convoy had been ambushed in a narrow pass, pinned under heavy machine gun fire from an elevated ridgeline. 3 Marines were trapped behind a burning MRAP, cut off from retreat, wounded. The shooters were dug into rock, firing from multiple angles, and their position was too steep for ground assault. Someone had to reach them, or someone had to end the threat from where they stood. Her rifle was still being cleaned when Martinez found her at the armory. "This isn't a range stunt," he said, handing over the spotting scope. "This is going to be ugly." She gave him a flat look. "It's always ugly. That's why we're here." The helicopter ride into the AO was cold and loud. Rotor wash slamming through the open door. Below, the ridges looked like the bones of some ancient creature, jagged and merciless. The closer they got, the more she understood why the pinned Marines hadn't moved. Every escape route was a shooting lane for the enemy. The SEAL team's BOD pointed toward a cliffside as they touched down. "Your hide's there, you've got maybe one. Clear lane if the wind holds." "How far?" she asked, though her eyes were already scanning the terrain. 2,600 meters, give or take. Close enough to the Death Valley shot to stir something in her chest. But this wasn't steel and sand. This was flesh, blood, and time running out. The climb to the hide was brutal. Every step through loose shale and jagged rock. By the time they crawled into position, her knees were scraped raw, and the mountain wind had numbed her fingers. Martinez unfolded the spotting scope, braced against the gusts. 3 firing positions, 1 heavy machine gun, 2 DSHKs on rotation. "You see that flash?" She did, just for an instant. The glint of metal through the rock slit. It was a hard angle, barely enough target to work with. And the wind here was nothing like Death Valley. It came in sharp bursts, carrying the smell of stone and smoke. Wounded Marines are still moving, Martinez said. One's dragging himself toward the MR ape. They don't have much time. She settled the rifle on its bipod, adjusting elevation. The plate in Nevada had been a known constant. This was chaos heat shimmer from burning fuel, crosswinds curling off the cliff face, the unpredictability of men firing and ducking. Her breathing slowed, the outside noise dimming. She wasn't thinking about the crowd that had watched her before, or the reporters who'd tried to reach her. She was thinking about those 3 men on the ground, their blood seeping into Afghan dust. Wind at 1,000, right to left, 4, Martinez said. Target is variable. Call it 6, gusting. To 9, the first shot had to count. There was no chance for correction if she missed. They'd know exactly where she was. Hold. Martinez murmured, tracking the glint again. Now. She broke the trigger clean. The rifle kicked, the mountain absorbing the echo into a hollow thud. Through the scope, she saw the slit go still. No return fire. Hit, Martinez confirmed. Dead center. The second gunner ducked, firing blind toward the pass. She shifted, adjusted for wind, and sent another round. This one punched into the rock just below him, close enough to spray debris into his face and drive him back. The SEALs below were moving now, darting forward to drag the wounded behind cover. Martinez kept calling positions, his voice clipped, precise. 2 more rounds, 2 more threats gone still, and then, quiet. The extraction was fast, brutal, and silent. The Marines were lifted out, one conscious enough to mumble thanks as they passed. Her on a stretcher, she didn't answer. Just adjusted the sling on her rifle, back at the FOB. The SEALs stopped her before she could head to her rack. Those guys live because of you, he said. They'll never forget it. She shook her head. They don't need to remember me. They just need to get home. That night, Martinez found her sitting outside again, same as after Death Valley. You didn't even flinch up there, he said, settling beside her. You knew it was going to hit. No, she said quietly. I just knew it had to. He was silent for a long moment. You ever think about how different it feels? Hitting steel versus hitting a man? She didn't answer right away. Steel doesn't leave a widow, or a child who's going to grow up without a father. Martinez exhaled slowly. But if you hadn't taken those shots, they'd be dead. She stared into the darkness. I know. And that was the part she didn't say aloud, the truth that being good at this meant carrying both weights. The lives you saved, the lives you ended. What did it mean to be called a hero for something you wished had never been necessary? Elena still didn't have an answer. 2 days after the Ridgeline mission, the press requests started again, more persistent this time. They weren't asking about Death Valley anymore. They wanted the rescue. They wanted the legendary female sniper who had picked apart a fortified ambush from nearly 2 miles away. They wanted the story packaged from morning news shows. For headlines, for shareable clips, the requests came through official channels at first, then through backdoors, journalists reaching out to old friends from her unit. Defense bloggers trying to get hold of Martinez. She ignored them all, but command didn't. When the operations officer called her into his office, she knew before he even spoke that it wasn't about training. He slid a thin folder across the desk, the pages inside already marked with highlighter and sticky notes. Public Affairs wants to do a feature, he said. Death Valley, the Ridgeline, your background. It's good for recruitment. She stared at him. Good for recruitment. She repeated, the words flat in her mouth. It's positive coverage for the branch. He said carefully, you've already got the story. This just tells it bigger. She didn't touch the folder. What about the people we pulled out? They're safe. They'll recover. And they'll probably be interviewed too. She let the silence stretch. She could almost hear Kowalski's voice in the back of her mind. The day you start shooting for applause, you stop being a sniper. I'm not interested, she said finally. The operations officer leaned back, exhaling. You're going to get interest whether you want it or not. Better to control it than have it written without you. She left without the folder that night. She found Martinez in the makeshift gym, working a heavy bag. "They want me to talk," she said. He threw another punch, the sound echoing in the empty space. "Figures. What do I say? That it was clean. That I knew they'd be dead if I missed?" Martinez slowed his punches. "You say the truth, that you did your job, nothing more. But that's not what they want." He stopped, leaning against the bag. "Then you don't give them what they want. Simple." Simple, but she knew. It wouldn't be the first time she saw her own face on a news segment. She was in the mess hall. Someone had left a TV on a cable news loop, and there it was, grainy footage from the range, the still photo from the Death Valley shot, and a voiceover calling her the most precise long-range shooter in U.S. military history. No mention of the Marines on stretchers. No mention of the wind, the calculations, the hesitation that came with taking a human life. Just a clean narrative. The impossible made possible. The other tables started watching her instead of the TV. Someone whistled low. She stood, left her. Trey half finished and walked out. By the end of the week, it was everywhere: magazine covers, defense industry blogs, recruitment ads, and with it came the letters. Some were from young women who wanted to enlist, inspired by what they'd seen. Others were from people who wanted details, technical specs of the rifle, breakdowns of the shot. And then there were the other letters, from widows, from fathers who'd lost sons, from people who'd been on the other end of someone else's impossible shot. They didn't blame her directly, but they reminded her of something she'd never really forgotten. Every bullet had two stories, one of survival, one of loss. Kowalski caught up with her on the range one afternoon. He stood behind her without speaking, letting her finish a pingisha. 5-shot group. "You shoot different now," he said when she cleared the chamber. "How so?" "You're thinking about the story instead of the shot. I can see it in the way you breathe." She set the rifle down. "They turned it into something it wasn't. They always do," he said. "But here's the thing. You can't control what they say. You can only control whether it changes you." She met his gaze. "And if it already has, then you decide if that change is something you can live with." The next deployment order came without fanfare. Another join-up, this time in an area so remote it didn't even have a proper name. Just a grid reference. The mission profile hinted at trouble intel about a high-value target moving through the area, protected by fighters with long-range capabilities. Martinez caught her eye as they read the brief together. "You know they're sending you because of the shot, right?" "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe they're sending me because they think I'll make the next one." He didn't answer, but his jaw tightened. In the days before they left, she went to the armory alone. She took out the .50 and cleaned it slowly, methodically, her hands remembering every contour. It felt the same as it had before Death Valley. Same weight, same balance, and yet it didn't. Because now, when she looked through the scope, she didn't just see the target. She saw the headlines, the letters, the faces of the men she'd saved, and the silence of the ones she hadn't seen but knew had fallen to someone else's rifle. The impossible had made her name, but living with it, that was something she was still figuring out. What if the shot wasn't just difficult? What if it might be wrong? That question followed Elena from the moment they lifted off until the moment the helicopter dipped into the cold, thin air of the valley. The landing zone was little more than a clearing in a gulch. The mountains rose on every side, jagged and pale in the moonlight, their slopes broken by scars of old rock slides. It wasn't the kind of place where you wanted to get pinned down, but that's exactly what had happened to the recon element they were sent to extract. Intel said the enemy was using an old Soviet lookout post, carved into the rock just below a ridgeline. High ground, perfect lines of fire, natural cover. They'd been hitting anything that moved below. The SEAL team's LT pointed toward a dark cut in the ridgeline. There, he said over the wind. That's their nest. We've got at least one heavy weapon possible, too. Our guys can't move without getting lit up. Martinez scanned through his scope and swore quietly. They've got the angle. This is going to be ugly. How far? Elena asked, though she was already kneeling to assemble the rifle. 2,900 meters from this position, Martinez said. Almost all of it uphill. The number hit her chest like a slow thud. She'd made a farther shot. Once on a training range, under perfect control. But this wasn't a plate in the Nevada sun. This was a bunker full of men who might not even know the word surrender. And then the LT added something else. We've also got 2 heat signatures in the bunker who don't match the fighters. Might be prisoners, could be civilians. The implication was clear. One wrong shot, and she'd hit someone she was here to protect. They set up behind a slab of rock just wide enough to shield them from return fire. The wind was treacherous, curling down the slope in cold bursts that changed direction without warning. Through the scope, the opening of the bunker looked like nothing more than a black cut in the rock, invisible unless you knew where to look. Martinez's voice was low. I can see the gun crew moving to man team on the heavy, but the other 2 shapes, they're in the back. Can't confirm who they are. She kept her cheek pressed to the stock. If they move forward into my lane, I don't take the shot. That might mean losing the window. Then we lose it, she said. I'm not killing someone just to prove we can make the shot. He didn't argue. Minutes passed. The only sound was the wind over the rock. Then there was the gun crew stepping into position, lining up to fire downslope at the pinned recon. Team, range confirmed. 2907, Martinez whispered. Wind at 1,000. Left to right. 6, 1,500. Gusting to 9. Target holding at left to right 7. She adjusted. The crosshairs steadying on empty space just above and left of the weapon's shadowed outline. Her breathing slowed. Still got 2 heat signatures. In back, Martinez said. Her finger rested on the trigger. Call me if they move forward. The crew leaned into their weapon. Send it, Martinez said. The rifle roared, recoil shoving against her shoulder. Through the scope, she saw a sharp jerk, the heavy weapon clattering against the wall. One man went down instantly. The second dove for cover, shouting in a voice that was swept away by the wind. The recon element below moved, quick bursts of gunfire echoing in the valley. Then Martinez hissed. One of the heat signatures just came forward. Smaller frame, could be a kid. Her chest tightened. The remaining gunner popped up again, reaching for the weapon. She shifted, exhaling, centering on the exposed shape. But the smaller figure, barely the height of the gun mount, was still inside her lane. Close enough that a miss or overpenetration could be catastrophic. Martinez's voice was urgent. You've got 3 seconds before he's firing again. She didn't pull the trigger. 2 seconds. The gunner's hand wrapped the grip. Then the kid, yes. Definitely a kid yanked him backward, breaking his stance. A SEAL round from below cracked into the opening, dropping him where he stood. The valley went quiet, except for the fading echo of gunfire. Martinez exhaled hard. That could have gone bad. It almost did, she said, clearing the chamber. The recon team's extraction was fast and loud rotor wash shouted comes. The stink of cordite still hanging in the air. When they were airborne again, she kept her eyes on the ridgeline until it dropped out of sight. Back at base, the LT found her by the gear lockers. I heard you had a shot lined up and didn't take it. That's correct, sir. Why? She didn't hesitate. Because I couldn't confirm my lane was clear, and I'm not putting a round into someone we're here to save. He studied her for a moment, then nodded. That's the right answer. But you know that's not the one everyone would have given. Maybe that's the problem, she said. That night, she sat with Martinez outside the barracks, the cold biting even through their jackets. You could have taken it, he said. And it would have been clean. Odds were in your favor. She shook her head. Odds aren't guarantees, and I'm not trading a maybe for a body I can't take back. He was quiet for a while. You know, he said finally, most people think sniping is about hitting what you aim at, but it's really about knowing when not to. The words stayed with her long after he went inside. What do they call you when you save a life by not taking the shot? Elena found out quickly. It wasn't hero. The debrief was barely over when the murmurs started. She heard them in the chow line, in the gym. Walking past the hangar, she froze. Could have ended it right there. Guess the legend has limits after all. She ignored them, mostly. But she caught Martinez's eyes more than once, half apology, half warning, and knew the talk was spreading. By the second day, it wasn't just whispers. Instructors from another unit asked her about it outright, their tone casual, but their eyes sharp. So you had him in your sights and just didn't? She repeated the same answer every time. I couldn't confirm my lane was clear. Some nodded in understanding. Others smirked, like she'd confirmed something they'd suspected all along, that the Death Valley shot had been luck. That she didn't have the cold nerve for the job when it mattered. It didn't take long for command to hear about it. She was summoned to the operations office again, this time with the XO sitting in. We reviewed the helmet cam footage from the SEAL element. The XO began. We also reviewed yours and your spotter's feeds. The kid wasn't visible in the scope until the last second. It was the right call to hold. She waited. That said, the XO continued. Your hesitation put the team at risk. The gunner could have re-engaged before the SEAL took him out. Her jaw tightened. With respect, sir, I didn't hesitate. I decided. The XO's eyes flicked to the ops officer, then back to her. You're not in trouble, but you should know this will be debated, and it will follow you. She left without answering. She already knew it would. 3 days later, the debate left the base entirely. A defense blog picked up a leaked after-action summary. The headline wasn't about the successful rescue. It was about the moment of hesitation from the sniper who'd become famous for never missing. Comments exploded. Some called her disciplined, others called her reckless, and more than a few accused her of losing her edge. The story got just enough traction to draw in the same media outlets that had glorified her before. One emailed her directly. We'd like to discuss your decision not to take the shot. She didn't reply. Martinez found her at the range late one night, the desert air cold enough to sting. She was working with a standard M110, the 50 locked away in the armory. You're letting them get to you, he said. I'm letting myself remember what actually happened, she replied, sending another round downrange. He picked up a spare mag and loaded it for her. They want to believe you're some kind of machine. Machines don't think, they just execute. She lowered the rifle, resting her cheek against her sleeve. Maybe they should want less from me. The tension bled into training. Instructors who'd once watched her with open curiosity now studied her like she might break. Younger shooters asked loaded questions during drills. So, when do you not take the shot? She gave them the honest answer, even when she knew they were fishing for a story. When you can't live with the result if you're wrong. Some wrote that down. Others rolled their eyes. It was Kowalski who finally broke the pattern. He caught her alone one evening, the last light bleeding over the ridgeline. You know why they're so loud about this? He asked. She shook her head. Because you reminded them it's not as simple as they want it to be. They want to believe the shot solves everything, that it's clean, final. But you showed them the part they don't like to talk about, the not shooting part. She glanced at him. And you? I think you made the harder call, he said. The one most of them wouldn't have the guts to make. The next morning, she found an envelope in her locker. No name. Inside was a folded note. You did the right thing. One of the 3. You got out alive. No signature, no rank. Just that single line. She kept it in her chest pocket for the rest of the deployment. What if the world never understood why you did the right thing? Would you still do it? Elena had already answered that for herself, but coming home meant living with the fact that her answer didn't satisfy everyone else. The flight back was long and sleepless. Somewhere over the Atlantic, Martinez handed her a pair of earbuds without a word, music, not military news. Not the chatter about her last mission, just a slow, low guitar line that filled the quiet between them. He didn't need to say what it meant. He'd been there. He'd seen it, and that was enough. When they landed stateside, the reception was nothing like the Death Valley return. No cameras, no brass waiting on the tarmac, no handshakes for the record. Just the low hiss of the plane's hydraulics and the smell of jet fuel. She preferred it that way, back on base. The rhythms returned, fast gear turned in, weapons logged, forms signed. But the silence wasn't complete. The whispers still followed her in hallways, this time softer, almost bored. Her moment of hesitation was no longer a fresh headline. It was just another story in the cycle, still there, for anyone who wanted to dust it off and use it. The letter from the rescued Marine stayed in her chest pocket. She'd pulled it out a dozen times on the flight, tracing the words with her thumb. You did the right thing. She wondered if he knew how rare it was for someone in uniform to say that and mean it without conditions. Martinez caught up to her on the range a week after they got back. You've been quieter than usual, he said, settling beside her as she checked 0 on the M110. I'm tired of explaining myself, she said without looking up. Then stop explaining. The people who matter already know? She thought about that. The people who matter. They weren't the loudest ones or the ones with the cameras. They were the Marines she'd pulled out, the teammates who'd seen the angle from her scope, the instructors who understood what it meant to not take a shot. That afternoon, she walked past the rec room and heard the television. They were replaying her Death Valley shot on a military history channel. The narrator's voice was deep and reverent, painting the moment like some clean, perfect legend. She stopped in the doorway for a long moment, watching herself in slow motion. The dust cloud from the muzzle blast, the pause, the distant eruption of the steel plate. They didn't show the ridgeline. They didn't talk about the choice she'd made there, the one that had cost her more than the recoil ever could. She turned the volume down and kept walking. In the weeks that followed, the media attention finally drifted to other things. A new record-breaking shot overseas, a public scandal in another unit. The cycle moved on, but she knew there would always be someone ready to bring it up again, one version or the other. Death Valley, the hesitation. That knowledge didn't weigh the way it had before. If anything, it sharpened something. Inside her, one evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, Kowalski found her on the observation platform overlooking the range. He didn't say anything for a while, just stood beside her, the faint smell of gun oil and dust between them. You're going to get asked about those shots for the rest of your career, he said finally. One for what you did, one for what you didn't. She watched the sky shift from gold to indigo. And what do I say? Whatever tells them you know the difference, he said. That night, she took the long walk out to the far edge of the base, where the wind off the desert was clean and sharp. She sat on the ground, knees drawn up, and thought about the two moments that had come to define her. One had been about proving something to herself, to the ones who doubted her, maybe even to the laws of physics. The other had been about refusing to trade someone's life for the chance to prove it again. Both had been deliberate. Both had been hers alone to make. The stars came out slow, scattered and cold above the dark line of mountains. She breathed in the night air, letting it settle the last of the noise inside her. Somewhere down the line, another sniper would make a shot farther than hers. Someone else would hold fire in a moment when the world expected them to squeeze the trigger. And maybe, if they were lucky, someone would understand. But whether the world understood or not, whether it called her hero, coward, legend, or ghost, she knew the truth. Sometimes, dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts, and sometimes, the The most precise shot you'll ever make is the one you never take.